Hey guys, John V from PhoneArena here. You're watching our video review of the Apple iPad Air 2. So last year's iPad Air was pretty notable just because it gave the iPad a huge redesign. With this year's model, Apple has done a little bit more by making it thinner and lighter. In fact, it's arguably one of the thinnest tablets on the market right now. And also sees the usual set of upgrades to the hardware. For example, better camera, better processor, and this time they've included the Touch ID fingerprint sensor, which was noticeably absent with last year's model. Superficially, it's a little bit tough to make out the design improvements made to the iPad Air 2's design over the original iPad. For starters, it's incredibly thin at 6.1 millimeters versus 13.4 millimeters thin with the original model. At the same time, its weight dips to under a pound versus pound and a half with the original model. Of course, uses the same design language of its predecessor, so you have some very rounded corners. It actually follows after the iPad mini's design language, so it's pretty comfortable, a lot of sturdiness thanks to the brushed aluminum casing, and it continues to be one of the more premium designed tablets in the space. The same 9.7-inch 2048 by 1536 Retina display is found here, just like last year's model. So with that, you're going to get a pixel density count of 264 pixels per inch, which is pretty good. It's effective enough to produce some crisp-looking details, so the display is fantastic for things like reading books, surfing the web. But there's something a little bit different about it this time. In fact, it reaches a brightness output of 410 nits, which is shy of last year's model, which produced 426 nits. Despite that, it's pretty visible outdoors, even when the sun is present. And there are other similar characteristics with the display. For example, you have a color temperature of 7001 kelvins, a gamma value of 2.22, and pretty much the same accurate color reproduction with this one. Pretty close, pretty good with it. And overall, the display, it's nothing new, but it continues to be a pretty attractive looking thing. Even though it might look exactly like its predecessor, there are some subtle changes to the design of the iPad Air 2. For starters, if we take a look here on the right side where the volume controls are located, gone is the mute or orientation lock switch. That's been removed because you could toggle the function via control center. Another change is with the home button. It now incorporates the Touch ID fingerprint sensor, so you could use that as an alternative form of unlocking the tablet. And on top of that, it's enabled for Apple Pay. The iPad Air 2 is running iOS 8.1, so it's the same experience we saw already with the iPhones, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. Visually though, it's pretty much unchanged over iOS 7. You still have that layer design, which uses a lot of translucency effects, but it still adheres to a very simple interface, intuitive, and you also notice that here with the home screen with the grid-like icons. But what's nice though, for a tablet, many of the native and even third-party applications are optimized to make use of the extra space we have in the tablet here. So they mainly use a lot of two-pane views. Functionally, the platform receives several new enhancements and features that gives it a good amount of depth, almost rivaling Android. So they include things like support for third-party widgets in the notifications panel. You have also support for third-party keyboards too if you want. You have an improved Spotlight search function and other goodies, including sharing content via family sharing and being able to even answer phone calls through the iPad if you have your account connected to an iPhone. At the end of the day though, the iPad Air 2 is still more of a fun tablet. You could do some light productivity tasks such as typing up documents, but don't expect to get the same level of functionality you get with a traditional laptop. What's really impressive about the iPad Air 2 is its stunning performance. It's just top-notch, very responsive. It's actually packing a triple-core Apple A8X processor, which is based on 64-bit architecture, and each core is clocks in at 1.5 gigahertz. It's also complemented with double the RAM this time around, so it's 2 gigabytes versus 1 from last year. And honestly, this thing is a beast. For 3D gaming, you could tell already how smooth and lickety split it really is with its performance, and we rarely see any stutter. At the same time, it's a delight to actually surf the web with the iPad Air 2 thanks to its Retina display, which I forgot to mention is laminated. So basically they reduce some of the layers with the display, so it's less reflective and offers basically great viewing angles. And of course, the navigational controls are very tight and responsive, so the experience is top notch with this one. The music player here is unchanged, so it's the same exact one found with last year's model. Now the tablet features 2 speakers on the bottom edge, and it produces a pretty robust 77.9 decibels of power, so it's pretty loud and able to resonate in small rooms. And at the same time, it has a very deep quality tone with it, so it doesn't sound too strained at the loudest volume setting. Whether you're at a coffee shop, in home, lying in bed, or just on the couch, you get that intimate experience when it comes to watching videos just because of the pretty stunning Retina display here in the iPad Air 2. It's visible, sharp, punchy, and plays all sorts of videos pretty smoothly. The camera sees a nice upgrade here with the iPad Air 2. It's now an 8 megapixel iSight camera, up from the 5 megapixel one from last year's model. And it features a 5-element lens, an aperture of f2.4. You have 1080p video recording, time-lapse video image stabilization, and that new slow motion 120 frames per second video capture. As far as the camera app's concerned, it largely remains the same. It's very simple. The majority of the real estate is reserved for the viewfinder. You have all the modes on the bottom right corner, and you also have the ability to now adjust the exposure. The camera is quite formidable, especially for a tablet. It even rivals many smartphones with its overall quality. And we gotta say, we're very impressed with the results. It composes some really nice photos. You get some sharp looking details, a very natural looking color reproduction, and proper exposure too. So even in different lighting conditions, it's able to adapt pretty well. And best of all, it takes some really awesome panoramic shots, and it's fairly easy to do. The only sore spot is of course lower lighting conditions. It tends to have, a very softer tone. There isn't much noise in it in the shots, which is great, but the downside is of course you just get very faint details and some washed out looking colors. It even excels in shooting 1080p videos. You won't be disappointed by the quality just because, again, you get a very strong emphasis with details. It even offers video stabilization, which is nice just because it helps to keep things very smooth and steady. The exposure is not too sensitive. It's pretty much spot on, very gradual. And on top of that, the audio recording is pretty crisp too. The only thing is that it doesn't feature continuous autofocus, so you have to continue to rely on using touch focus to adjust the focus itself. That's wonderful that we're able to get through a solid 1 day of normal usage with the iPad Air 2. So that should also please power users just because they don't have to worry about constantly recharging the tablet. But in our battery benchmark tests, it actually falls short of its predecessor. It establishes a mark of 7 hours and 27 minutes, which is almost an hour short of the original iPad Air's tally. But nevertheless, it's still good when it comes to real-world usage. The question that remains is whether or not you should pick up the iPad Air 2, especially if you have last year's model. Well, it still sports the same $500 price point for the base 16GB Wi-Fi option. Of course, they've introduced a new gold color. Instead of a 32GB model, it's been replaced by the 64GB one, and you also have the 128GB version to pick from as well. Now, as a tablet, this pretty much reigns supreme. It's an all-around performer. You're getting great specs, fantastic hardware, impressive design, and the performance is equally stunning as well. It takes some nice photos and videos. It's great for gaming. It's a wonderful consumptive device. Now, in terms of productivity, it might not rival what you get out of a laptop, but it is better than most smartphones and tablets on the market. Of course, if you own the iPad Air, it's kind of tough thinking about making the jump to pick up the iPad Air 2 just because you're getting the same experience on the original model. So there's nothing differentiating this one here. The only thing that's going to change is, of course, the color option, the addition of the Touch ID fingerprint sensor, and the improved performance in the processor, and of course the camera. So if those are things that matter to you, then maybe the $500 is worth the investment. But despite that, it's still a great, fantastic tablet if you're in the market for one. So if you guys want to learn more about the iPad Air 2, you can check out our website, PhoneArena.com. It's John V. Thanks for watching.